Today I'm going to be doing my May mid-month wrap-up. I read 10 books so far this month. I've actually had a really good couple weeks reading. Like all these books are 4 or 5 stars except for one 3-star. So I'm really excited to talk about all these because they were all so good. So the first book that I read was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is a thriller. I gave this 4 stars. It's a super popular book, so I'm sure a lot of you have already read it. But it's about this woman who's a journalist who goes back to her hometown to cover a story about these young girls who are being killed. And she ends up being a lot more intermingled in the situation than she was expecting to be. The characters in this book were insufferable. All of them were insufferable. They were all pretty terrible. But I still really liked reading this. I did guess who the killer was at about 50% of the way through the book, but I didn't mind because there was still so much going on. So it didn't really bother me that I already kind of had it figured out, but this one I definitely would recommend if you haven't read it. I think it's a really good thriller. Next, I read After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a contemporary romance. I gave this 5 stars. I'll say it again, Taylor Jenkins Reid can do no wrong, in my opinion. I love literally everything she writes. This one is about this couple who finds themselves not being able to stand each other anymore. They've been together for years and they just don't like each other anymore. And so they decide to separate with no contact at all. Like they're not going to contact each other at all for a year. And then after a year, they're gonna see if that brings them back together, essentially, if that kind of gives them a fresh start, because they don't want to give up on each other, but they just don't like each other anymore and they're not in love anymore. So this one I wasn't super sure about whether I would like it or not just because of the concept, but I did freaking love it, just like I love all of her books. This one would have made me cry if I wasn't in public, but it was super emotional. And I really didn't know whether or not they were gonna get back together or not. Like she didn't really lead one way or the other with her writing throughout the whole book. So it was like a surprise to us about whether they would or whether they wouldn't when we got to the end as well. So I really liked that it wasn't like very obvious throughout the whole book. And I thought the ending was done perfectly. So this one I would 100% recommend you read. Next, I read Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a YA sci-fi fantasy. This I gave 4 stars. I actually liked my time reading this towards the end. I felt like it had a really slow start for me personally. There was a lot of action and things going on. I just wasn't really invested in it until the very end. But this is about a bunch of a large cast of characters, really. I feel like they all have pretty significant roles. But Tyler misses the draft to choose his crew pretty much. And they're, up in space and all that. But he misses his draft because he actually ends up stumbling across this spacecraft that's been missing for over 200 years. And so he goes to check it out and finds Aurora in cryosleep, still alive in this spacecraft, a human. So he's rescuing her, and therefore he misses the draft and ends up with like a band of misfits, pretty much. All of the people who everybody else didn't want is now on his crew to go do missions or whatever they're assigned to do. And they end up in a situation way bigger and way more important than they knew or were expecting. So you kind of follow along in that journey. It all surrounds around Aurora. And I will be continuing on with the next book, but only because of the ending. Like the end of the book is what kind of pushed me to read the next one. If the ending had been really much different, I don't think I would have continued on at all, because the first 3/4 of this book I really was not invested in. But I'm hoping the second one kind of picks up where the first one left off, and I do really like it, but we will see. Next, I read All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. This is a contemporary romance. I gave this 5 stars as well. I tend to give a lot of 5 stars to Colleen Hoover. I really, really like her books. They're way more emotional than a lot of contemporary romance is, and I like that sometimes. So this one is about this married couple, again, that is struggling to hold it together and keep their marriage strong and together due to infertility. And so this one is super like emotional and kind of hard to read at times, but I loved it. I was super frustrated with both characters at times, the hero and the heroine. I was pretty frustrated with both of them, but it ended up working out great. The ending was so good. I loved the conclusion, but it had a lot of tropes in it that I usually really don't like, but for some reason, I didn't mind them in this book at all. I actually kind of liked them. So 100% read this book. It is so good. Next, I read Geekerella by Ashley Poston. This is a YA contemporary romance. It's a Cinderella retelling. I do think it did a pretty good job of retelling Cinderella. There was a lot of things that were very, very similar to the original story. This is about this girl who finds out that the main character of this TV series that she loves is being played by someone she really dislikes in the remake. So it's an old TV show that her and her dad loved, and they're remaking it, and the prince in the show is cast to be someone she doesn't like. So she ends up having to jump through hoops to find a way to get to this convention that they're throwing that her dad actually started many years ago, and compete in the costume contest for this specific show. And through that process, she ends up having a sort of friendship with this person she doesn't know. This person had texted her about the convention and she didn't know who it was, and they just kind of kept texting each other back and forth, and she doesn't know who he is. So you kind of follow along with her journey. You do get both point of views from her and him. I really liked that. And so this one I gave 4 stars. Like I said, I'm not super into fandoms and conventions, TV shows, anything like that. I'm not super into that stuff, but I still really, really liked this book. I would have continued with the series if the next book in the series wasn't tropes that I really, really dislike. So I'm not going to continue on, but it's not for lack of liking this book. I did really like this one. I just know that I will not like the next one. Next, I read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is a thriller. I gave this one 4 stars as well. This is about this woman who is down on her luck and ends up taking a job as an apartment sitter for this super rich, high-end apartment complex that's super well known, and things get dark very fast. Things go bad very quickly. This book is only over a span of like a week, I think. It's not very long, and things get crazy. I really, really liked this book. This is my first Riley Sager. I know there are people who say that his books are super formulaic and they all kind of follow a pattern. I would not know that because this is my first one. So maybe once I read more, I might not like them as much if they do follow a similar pattern. But this one I really, really enjoyed. I never in a million years would have guessed where this was gonna go. I never would have guessed it. So that I really, really liked. And this is another one that I would recommend. Next, I read The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is a fantasy romance. I gave 4 stars. There's not a whole lot I can say because this is the 3rd book in the series. This is the 3rd book in the Blood and Ash series. The first one was From Blood and Ash. I liked this book, but this is my least favorite of the 3 because there was just too much talking. Like they just were talking all the time and there wasn't a whole lot of stuff happening. I felt like it could have been quite a bit shorter. But I will be continuing on with the series, and Kieran is my favorite character. I love him more and more with every book. I kind of wish he had his own like spin-off series, or he became more involved with Cass and Poppy, but we will see what happens. I will continue on. I still would highly recommend this series, but so far the second book, Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, is my favorite. Next, I read Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. This is a contemporary romance. I gave this 4 stars. This is brother's best friend and fake dating, but this is about this woman who wants her family to take her more seriously, and so she's trying to take steps to go about that. And the hero is wanting to not be seen so much as a playboy anymore. He's trying to change how people see him so that he can land this job, and they end up fake dating. Like I said, it is her brother's best friend, and so there's some little tension there in the beginning, but I really, really liked this. I thought it was super good. It is one of those romances where the heroine has loved the hero forever. They grew up together and she has always had feelings for him and he's been completely oblivious. So this is a good one. Definitely check it out if you're looking for a good, easy romance. Next, I read Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. This is a historical romance. I gave this 5 stars. This is so good. This was so good. This is about this woman who falls off of a horse like 3 years in the past, and she fell off a horse and lost her hearing, but nobody knows that she lost her hearing. She didn't tell them that. She has just stopped talking. She hasn't said anything since her accident 3 years prior. And the king decides that she is to be married to her family's rival clan's laird. And so you follow their relationship and how everything kind of plays out. There's outside conflict in this relationship. It's not conflict within the two of them, which I really, really find refreshing sometimes. Sometimes I really get tired of it always being a problem between the hero and the heroine. They can't just be happy. There's something that has to be wrong with their relationship. And it's not really like this in this one. It's outside conflicts that are the problem. And Graham, the hero, is the only person in his clan pretty much that willingly accepts her and takes care of her and is nice to her and treats her the way she should be treated, when everybody else is just garbage to her. They're terrible. And so I loved him. He's literally one of the best heroes I feel like I have ever read. To me, he was just absolutely great. He was so patient. He was the best. And he is part of the reason why I loved this book so much. I will 100% be reading the next book in the series because the next book follows one of Graham's brothers. So I'm super excited about that. And the last book I'm going to talk about is Dark House by Karina Halley. This is a horror romance. I gave this 3 stars. I really wanted to love this book. I really did, but it was just okay to me. Like, it wasn't bad, but I won't be continuing on with the series. This is about this woman who sees ghosts, but doesn't realize that she sees ghosts. And she ends up running into a webcast producer inside of her uncle's haunted lighthouse. And things start to go crazy inside the lighthouse. There was no real romance in this book at all. Dex, the hero, has a girlfriend throughout the whole book, and they don't really do anything wrong. I guess towards the end you can see how they kind of have an attraction towards each other and how it might lead to something in the following books. But in this book specifically, there's no romance. Like, she likes him, but there's no romance. This does have a kind of unreliable narrator, so that can be fun, but sometimes I don't like that. And I just feel like it didn't really work very well in this book because I just had a hard time getting on board with her specifically. So I won't be continuing on. I listened to the audiobook and the narrator sounded like she had something in her mouth the whole time, and it really irritated me and kept taking me out of the story. I wonder if I would have read it and not listened to the audiobook, if I would have liked it a little bit better, because I just really did not like that narrator. I'm sorry, I just didn't. She just sounded like she had something in her mouth the whole time. Like, who allowed that to be published like that? I don't know. I really disliked it. So those are the 10 books that I have read so far in the month of May. I am really happy with what I've read so far. Let me know if you have read any of these. If you want to read any of these, I would love to know. But that is everything for me this time. I will see you all next time. Bye.